Hey, we're so happy you found us online. The message you're about to hear was recorded live at Grace Family Church. We're a community following the call to love God, love people, and make a difference. We meet at 4 locations around Durban and at graceonline.tv. Go ahead and share this message, or you can download it and listen to it in your car or at home later today. Wherever you are in the world, wherever you're listening from, thank you for connecting with us, and may you be encouraged by the message coming up next.
A few weeks ago, Tom was using my car to take the boys to school when I got a frantic phone call from him. They were about to run out of petrol, and the first petrol station that they'd stopped at didn't have any petrol, and now they were freewheeling down the hill to another one. And I remembered that there are basically 2 types of people in the world. And I was wondering, as you look at this picture, which one are you? Why don't you tell me now in the comment section below, which of the 2 are you? Are you an A person or a B person? I'll let you guess whichever one you think I am. Whichever one you are, obviously you can't drive on an empty tank. And just so you know, they did make it to the petrol station. But more importantly, you can't pour from an empty bucket. The space within us that is the source of life, our hearts, our souls, where we get our energy from to move forward with purpose and optimism, that space for so many of us that we have to pour out of, we often find empty. For many of us, 2020 has emptied our buckets of time, hope, money, passion, or even just the capacity to do life. Tom and I were chatting about how 2020 had poked a few more holes in the buckets, things that drain us. But all the things that would normally fill our buckets had changed or even stopped completely. You can't pour from an empty bucket. Which is all good and well, but what do we do when so many of the activities or practices that we need to fill our buckets, to energize us, have gone? How do we fill our buckets when we're low on cash or short on time or don't have a lot of support? Wherever you are today and whatever you're going through, I wonder if you know the answer to this question. Why is your bucket empty? Perhaps you're tired and weary after a long, strange year. Too many holes and not enough coming in. Perhaps you're busy and striving, hustling to solve problems and make plans and meet expectations. Maybe you've bitten off more than you can chew, and you're running a marathon at the pace of a sprint. Or perhaps your bucket feels empty because you have a holy longing, a gnawing sense that something is missing from your life. Maybe your sense of purpose, peace, or calling is dwindled, has drained. Maybe you're longing to know where you're headed and if your life is meaningful. Perhaps you have a restless heart. Last week, I bumped into a friend that I haven't seen for ages, and when I asked her about her work, she spoke of the intensity and the stress this year had held at work, but how she was feeling uncertain and dissatisfied with where she'd ended up. And she told me how whenever she was stressed, she withdrew from her friends, she withdrew from serving and from church, and now everything is about work, and she's caught herself wondering, is this my life now? And as we chatted, I remembered this quote. It's from one of the early church fathers, Augustine of Hippo. And he said, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee." Why is your bucket empty? Whatever the answer is, here's the truth for each of us today. The satisfaction of a restless heart is in God alone. The satisfaction of a restless heart is in God alone. Your heart may be restless because it's been too long since you rested. Your heart may be restless because it's damaged and it needs to be restored. Your heart may be restless because it's wandering aimlessly through life. But for whatever reason, your bucket is empty. The satisfaction of a restless heart is in God alone. So, how do we find joy again in a life of restlessness? Because there are seasons like this. How do we find contentment, satisfaction, and joy for our restless hearts, those empty buckets? Today, I want to share 2 ways to do this: to be filled with God and to be emptied of self. What do I mean when I say to be filled with God? Well, in Psalm 126, we see a very confident, bold prayer request. We see the cry of a restless heart, and perhaps this is your cry today. In verse 4, the writer says, "Restore our fortunes, O God, like the watercourses in the Negeb. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves." I just want to press pause here because I sense that this is going to hit home for someone. And perhaps this is your prayer. Maybe you feel like all you've been sowing are tears. All you've been investing or producing or giving this world is weeping or struggle. Perhaps you're feeling the sadness of a deep loss of a dream, a person, a plan. Or maybe you have the deep sadness of having lost your way. This morning, today, I see you and I want you to know God sees you. Maybe this is the cry of your heart. You're longing, like the psalmist writes, for a heart full of joy, not tears. You're longing for hands full of beauty, sheaves, something that has been harvested, not burdens. This is a confident request that the writer is making, and perhaps you're longing to pray it with confidence too. And the way that we can do that, if we back up a couple of verses, you'll find that these are not just words. This is not just a request. There is an active way of engaging in an outcome like this, in an outcome of having joy in our hearts and hands. There is an active way of participating in producing this wholehearted, joyful life that I think so many of us are longing for. So let's go back. Psalm 126, this time verse 1-3. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongues with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The psalmist repeats himself. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. To fill our empty buckets, to satisfy our restless hearts, we need to remember what God has done for us. A confident plea follows reflection and remembering. The Lord has done great things for us, and perhaps today you need to remind yourself, what has God done for you? What has God done in your life? Because the satisfaction of a restless heart that is not content, that is not satisfied, it is in God alone. So often our buckets feel empty of joy. We feel drained of life because we have forgotten what God has done for us. In stress and in demand and in difficult times, the goodness of God can so often fade in our memories. But there's something important about gratitude. C.S. Lewis writes this. He says, if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably, earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. And if that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or to be unthankful for the earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for something else, of which they are only a kind of copy, an echo, or mirage. These are such rich, beautiful words, and what C.S. Lewis is telling us is that gratitude not only reminds us of the goodness of God, but it reminds us that our earthly longings are not what we were made for. Gratitude gives us perspective on what really matters, what is real and true and of substance in our lives. We are so often distracted by copies of the real thing. So I want to invite you right now to press pause, maybe even literally press pause in just a minute. Grab a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper or your phone and take a minute to fill your buckets, to write down some of the things that you're grateful for, to remind yourself of the goodness of God. The satisfaction of a restless heart is found when we are filled with God and also when we are emptied of self. And this kind of feels a bit counterintuitive, like if we feel like we've been drained by the year we've been through, the season we're coming through, it sounds counterintuitive to be emptied of self. So what do I mean when I mean emptied of self? Well, I'm reminded of a season in my life where for about 12 years in a row, I attended the Global Leadership Summit. I heard stories of really amazing people. And in particular, it was the young women that they would interview or have speak, young women my age that just fascinated me. They were starting global NGOs. They were changing the face of education or leading transformational organizations, writing amazing books. For many years, every time the Global Leadership Summit happened, I'd find myself aching with longing for something special. I'd pray and I'd say, God, what is my thing? What is the thing I'm going to be known for, the thing I'm going to do? Where is my big opportunity to make an impact on the world? I'll do anything you want, God. Just tell me what it is. And then I don't know when exactly it happened, but one year I realized with an awkward reality check the state of my heart and how what I thought I was being inspired by was really this conviction in my heart. And I had to acknowledge, Jess, it's not about you. Ouch. Augustine's words, if I can remind them, are, Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee. If I'm honest, I wanted big, massive. I wanted my thing. I thought my heart would be satisfied by notoriety or recognition or even just scale of impact. And I'd heard it many times, but somehow I didn't think it applied to me. But the truth of Mother Teresa's words were, don't worry about doing great things. Do little things with great love. I'd prayed, I'll do anything you want, God, but did I really mean anything? What if God wanted me to work part-time, to be present with my kids, to support my husband? Is that all? Yikes, God, anything but that. But here's the truth about our restless hearts and the desires that we find ourselves pursuing. filling ourselves, filling our buckets, filling our hearts with God means filling ourselves with love, because God is love. But unlike what the world tells us about satisfying ourselves, this is not self-love. It's a love for others. It's a love that is wanting what is best for someone else and doing something about it. To empty yourself is to love and to give yourself away. Because love is not a feeling, it's not a sentiment that comes and goes, it's an act of the will. And the key to happiness, to joy, to a full bucket, to a satisfied heart is not only to be filled with God, but to be emptied of self. It is the equivalent of making your life a gift. To empty ourselves is to make our lives a gift to someone else. If we want joy, that's the path. You see, I think what I've realized is that so often we find ourselves in one of two dramas, kind of one of two narratives or acts. The first is the ego drama. Ego is a person's sense of self or self-esteem. And in the ego drama, you're the director of the movie. You're the producer of the movie. You're the star of the movie. The sadness of a restless heart, a heart that's longing for more, feeling empty, is that so often it's a heart that has centered itself in the spotlight. You see, when we center ourselves, when our buckets are full of our own sense of self, every injustice I experience is aimed at me. Every disappointment I experience is aimed at me. Every accomplishment I have is one I want credit for. Every prize, all the glory, every burden, every criticism, all aimed at me. This is the ego drama. No wonder we are exhausted and we can't meet all the expectations. No wonder we get bitter and resentful. No wonder we are blindsided by the scrutiny of others, of people watching our every move, or of placing our impossible performances in front of us. You see, we were not created for the center of the stage. We were created to center God. Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee. Thankfully, there is another way to live. It's not just the ego drama that we can live into, but the theo drama. Theo means God, where we get words like theological. But in a theo drama, God is the writer, the director, the producer. Jesus is at the center of the stage, and we may have a role to play, but it is Jesus in the spotlight. Jesus taking the glory and the honor, and by the grace of God, Jesus taking the criticism, Jesus taking the struggle and the disappointment and the pain. The smallest part you can play in the theodrama will produce more joy and peace in your heart than a starring role in the ego drama. We were not created for the center of the stage. We were created to center God. And who does God center? People. Other people. This time of year at Grace Family Church, we do our Thanksgiving buckets, where we fill them with items that other people need. Now imagine this Thanksgiving, I went and bought this bucket, and instead of filling it with gifts for someone else, I filled it with the things I long for. I would put in a new laptop bag and a GHD. I'd put in some baskets for the pot plants in my bedroom and maybe an air fryer to, keep my family life more convenient. I hate cooking. Imagine taking that bucket full of Jess-scented items and giving it away. I mean, this is like obviously bonkers, but It's a metaphor for how so many of us live our lives. We center ourselves and then we wonder why. We're exhausted, frustrated, misunderstood. It only took me all of my 20s and most of my 30s. But after watching this year's Global Leadership Summit, and I probably will need to be reminded of it again and again, I can't explain to you the relief I feel to hear God liberate me from my oversized sense of self with a generous, freeing, Jess, it's not about you. Friend, if your bucket feels empty because you're wondering if they'll ever appreciate you or notice how hard you work, if you're running on fumes, trying to prove yourself, trying to meet the expectations, you can breathe a massive sigh of relief and embrace the freedom of Jesus' way of emptying yourself. So let me close with this. Jesus was the model of someone who emptied himself for others. He laid down his life. When he was living, he served. He advocated for the marginalized and the poor. He came for the brokenhearted and the hurting. He came to heal and care. And when we model that, when we copy Jesus, our restless hearts find renewed energy and purpose. And when we pick up this work that Jesus has laid before us, we find the satisfaction we are longing for. So today, whatever the state of your heart, here is Jesus' invitation. Won't you take a deep breath as you listen to these words from Matthew 11. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. If you're restless, weary, tired, and longing for what is missing, you have a holy longing in your life. If you're living from an empty bucket and you're thirsty to be filled, then friends, I want to encourage you today to practice these two things. Be filled with God by remembering what God has done. Be filled with God by remembering what God has done. Now, maybe you're not a follower of Jesus. Someone who cares about you sent you this message. Maybe you've stumbled into this place out of curiosity, but maybe as you've listened, you're realizing that the restlessness in your soul is there because you've never opened your heart to Jesus. Did you know that God has made you, designed you, planned for you, intended for you to live with the fullness of God's love for you in your heart? You are not alone. You're not done. You were made for the companionship and presence of God. And you can receive the love of God the Father, the Creator, the friend. Be filled with the love and grace of God. Perhaps you are a follower of Jesus, but you know you've lost some joy. And you need to be reminded of the goodness of God. Reflection and remembrance, filling your bucket by remembering what God has done, will lead you to rest, will lead you to rejoicing. And you can rest in the remembrance that you are neither forsaken nor forgotten. Be filled by God. Be emptied of self. And we empty ourselves by making our lives about others. How can you do that? Well, if you've found yourself in a season of striving, step back. Center God again. Find the relief in realizing that God is the producer and director, and it's not in your control. If you found yourself in a season of self that's snuck in and crept in and lulled you into a false sense of you're the guy in charge, security in ourselves, make your life a gift. I want to invite you, if you're bored and dissatisfied, give yourself. Empty yourself. Give your time, your attention, your money, your skills to someone else. Rediscover the freedom of it's not about you. What rest and relief there is for those of us who let go and let God. So I'm going to close in prayer. And I want to invite you, if you haven't already, to buy a bucket and use it as an opportunity to practice what we've preached. To fill yourself with God, remembering what He's done, and to empty yourself. Make it about someone else. Let's pray. Jesus, I'm so grateful that we can walk with you as a companion. I'm so grateful that we don't have to have the answers, know the plan, be in control, but we can surrender to you because you are loving and good, because your yoke is not heavy, the way you lead us is not a burden, but it is light and it fits us. And when we walk with you and work with you, we can recover our lives. I pray for those who want to be filled with your love, maybe even for the first time. May they sense your spirit, your presence, your companionship right now, Lord. And I pray for those whose hearts are restless and weary. May they lose their lives in order to find it. And most of all, God, I thank you for your grace. That your love and your presence and your kindness to us is never ending. It never runs out. It never runs dry. And so we choose to fill ourselves with that today. In Jesus' name, amen.